Let's continue looking at this history. So one thing that I want to make clear is that most of the people that are doing this, it's a very small minority because dating is just still so brand new, and really you have these young kids who are creating this concept. So there's all these kind of elements in regards to this lecture of what's going on, and it's not just like one solid history. It's bits and pieces of these things that are happening that kind of shape our understanding of dating. So I kind of want to continue and see how it transforms and the way it shapes women's lives. So one thing that we still see today is this concept of treating, right, where the men pay for the majority of the dates, if not all the dates, and it creates this kind of power structure there, right, between the woman and the man. So these women, they would go out with these young men, and the hope was that it would turn into some form of sexual pleasure, right? So again, that's that question: is this prostitution or is it not? And doesn't necessarily need to lead to sex, but definitely there are these kind of expectations that are created, and to this day, I mean, those concepts really have not changed that much, right? But the moment that the man provides you with something, there is an expectation, whether it's kiss or even something more than that. And these women are not blind to what's happening in this transaction because they live it, right? They go to work and they're constantly being sexually harassed at work, so they know this kind of language of sex, right? So something like treating, they know what the expectations are. Again, whether they do it or not, that's a whole different thing. But because many of these young women work, they're not oblivious to the reality of the things that they are facing when the guy says something. And even today, I mean, many of us, particularly men, have this language that we use, and I'm sure some women, but some might not know what we're talking about, right? We use all these innuendos. These young women, because they are working, they are familiar with the terminology. So the charity girl, right, at the beginning of the lecture, that's what we're looking at. Who is this charity girl? Well, it's definitely all the things that we talked about. Again, working class, not making a lot of money. They're not working dirty jobs, though. They're working at respectable places. They're not prostitutes. So, what makes them, I guess, different from a woman that takes in calls, right, that we saw earlier? Well, for many of these young women, they're creating this system of dating, and they make it explicitly clear that they're not prostitutes. They're just young women who want to have fun. Simple as that, right? And if they do engage in some of this behavior, they're not stigmatized by it. So if they do engage in sexual activity, it doesn't define them, at least not in their kind of working class neighborhoods. Those middle class moralists, again, they're very concerned as to what these young women are doing, but they themselves, they're just, they could care less what these moralists think of, because to them, it's none of their business. So this concept of respectability is definitely being challenged, right? It's definitely challenging those Victorian ideals that were established in the late 1800s. And they're being challenged because of the city. As I mentioned in some other lecture, that 50% of the people live in the cities now. And the city allows you to hide, even though there's all these people there, it allows you to hide because nobody knows you, right? Nobody cares really what your life is all about. So sometimes there's more privacy in this crowded space than living in some small little community out in the burbs somewhere or in some rural area. So many of these women move to the city. Again, they're trying to make a living, but at the same time, they have that free time to have fun, and allow the urban jungle allows them to kind of wash away any stigma that would have been viewed as negative had they lived in a small community. We find, and normally I ask the class this question because it's an interesting question, right? It's an interesting result. That when is it okay to sleep with somebody that you're dating? Well, in contemporary culture, the number does fall on the third date, where it's like, well, you dated long enough, so it's okay. And again, people have different variations on that. But as a society, we kind of see it okay. Well, go back 100 years, same number, right? It's on the third date. It's considered okay to sleep with a person because now you're in a somewhat committed relationship. So you don't have to be a virgin when you marry because people are engaged in this activity at a very young age. At least these young working class women are. And these women, again, they're not looking for husbands. They're just looking to have a good time. They smoke, they drink, they dance, they hook up, and they go on with their lives. And though it might, some of these relationships might seem temporary, some of them didn't, right? Some of them actually lasted, and some of them ended up getting married with them. So at least within this subculture, it was okay to sleep with your steady boyfriend if you had one. There was nothing wrong with that. So what do we learn? We find that in the context of this kind of working class environment, the concept of courtship shifts from a middle class control to a working class control, right? The working class is now defining what dating is. And it's not like some big agenda, it's just part of that process, right? Part of this urban youth where calling just doesn't make sense for a group that can't afford to have, bring guys over to their homes and feed them and entertain them and play the piano and all that kind of stuff. It's really this kind of urban space that allows them to leave the home and enter the public space, such as dance halls, movies, and places like Coney Island. And we find that these young women are challenging middle-class sensibility and really advocating for their own agency, right? Their own liberation, if you will. And again, these women are not feminists. That's not really their intent. They're just trying to have a good time, and they can't afford to, so why not have some guy pay for it? It just makes economic sense. So, but in doing so, they really kind of transform culture, because I'm sure you all follow some of these mannerisms that were created 100 years ago. And today we kind of look at them in this kind of feminist lens, though that wasn't the intent, right? And then finally, it's, these things that I lectured, I know I went through it kind of quickly, are definitely part of our culture today. Everything from the, where people go to have fun, to drinks, right? Dancing, even economics, where, women are still paid, 70 cents to the dollar. So sometimes they still allow men to pay for the dates, and there's no expectations there. And then even the what do you call it? The third date issue, right? Where society, even to this day, seems like they're fine with that. So something that happened 100 years ago still shapes our culture today. And it was these women, these working class women, who created it.